There's
So what should we
Father
talk
Mike
about?
getting his coffee.
He literally just got up right when we started.
Atlanta Braves baseball. So you were saying what movie is this, Rob?
Oh, 13 Days.
13 Days.
Yeah, recommend it. It's Kevin Costner, a couple other actors you would know, but it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm.
And it's interesting. I watched it because when I was down in Florida a couple weeks ago with my mom and dad, we went to the Everglades. And the Everglades you can visit the Nike missile base in the Everglades that was set up in response to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's this very, very interesting thing. They have like it's obviously disarmed and everything, but they have a real Hercules missile that you can go in the bunker and see and everything. Wow. So it's pretty cool. It's just like this, not in ruins, but just you're just out in the middle of the Everglades and these old bunkers that they built. Wow. But it's interesting. So, and I don't know like the exact historical accuracy of 13 Days, but it's just an entertaining movie. And there's a great scene. So Adlai Stevenson would have been like the kind of the old grizzled politician. I think for Kennedy, he was the ambassador to the United Nations. And they kind of at least portray him as like just tired and kind of like not up to the hard fights anymore politically. But then at the UN, he just goes after like the Soviet ambassador, and you can like find it on YouTube. It's a cool scene in the movie, but he tells the Soviet guy tells him, pretty much that the U.S. has no evidence for this, and they're putting the world on the brink of war. And Stevenson just he hammers him, man, and he says he's like, yes or no, did you put those ballistic missiles in Cuba? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no. And he just like keeps on him and to the United Nations, and the Soviet guy's like, I'm not in a court here, blah, 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 tries to skate the question. And Stevenson's response is like, well, I'll wait for my answer until hell freezes over. And he just sits there. So there's it's just like cool political scenes and everything. But one of the things that they do talk about in the movie, which was like such the fear of the time, was just like the chain reaction that happens in situations like that. So like had Kennedy done an airstrike to take out those missiles, which like their understanding was we didn't have proper defenses of like Washington was in danger if those missiles went live. And so he tried the blockade and all of that. And I have not read this book. The movie references The Guns of August. You guys ever heard of that book before? But it's like the movie portrays it as it was very influential to Kennedy. I think it's a movie about World War I, where like leaders kind of operated under former like rules of former times. And in doing so, and like not actually communicating with each other, it led to World War I, because it was just like, this happened, so like then we have to do this, and then we have to do this, and we have to do this.
Right.
Anyway, that was just a movie. It's worth watching. But on all the geopolitical stuff going on now, it's like, gosh, you can't be like, you just pray for like strong, clear leadership, but also like there is like that reality of like, please Lord, don't let just like reactions happen. That's the stuff that frightens me, of like, it's just this happens, then this, so that.
Right, and all logically from one step to the other makes sense, but when you look at the big picture, you're like, why are we doing this?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and this episode's going to go out quite a bit after we're recording it now, so who knows what the situation on the ground is. But
sure,
another good movie on this vein, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, I watched with my parents recently, was called The Courier. It's Benedict Cumberbatch, who has an awesome name. He plays this English... It was a true story. It was a guy who sold like heavy equipment or something, or maybe chemicals. Um, and when was the Cuban Missile Crisis? The 60s,
Well,
early
Kennedy,
60s.
when did Kennedy get killed? 63. So Cuban Missile Crisis would have been like 61,
Mm-hmm.
62-ish. Yeah, somewhere in there.
So it was around that time, and he was recruited by the English CIA, which is called what? This is vintage. What are they called again? The not MI6 or whatever. But anyway, the intelligence people to go in because they still had some commercial relations with Moscow, and he was got special approval by the Kremlin to go in and do and sell things to them, and because they knew they had a mole in the whatever, like one of the secretaries of defense or secretaries of whatever, um, was sympathetic to the West and knew about the missiles in Cuba and got him like tons and tons of intelligence that basically like stopped the it was what led to it was the proof they needed, in other words, to like stop that from happening. And it was just some dingleberry, like he was not military, he wasn't trained at all. It cost him a lot, um, and it put him in a ton of danger, and he was imprisoned for, well, I don't want to spoil the movie, but um,
Spoiler alert.
it
Go
was
ahead. Go
it
ahead.
was
He
crazy.
dies.
The Courier, watch it.
Wow, that's the first time we haven't actually spoiled it. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, here it comes.
She dies. Yeah.
It's we're already locked and loaded. I'm not gonna not say it. Here we are. Yeah, man.
Pretty wild stuff.
It is. It's tough to imagine like, well, one guy can be so influential like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's I don't know. I guess that's the question that I have is he the embodiment of a Russian spirit that desires this thing? Like they have this old dream of bringing the Balkans Empire back, or is he just a wild man individually?
I would ask it, and go back to that if you want to, Mets. My thought, and I've wondered about this before because I don't have an answer, but do ideas shape history or do people shape history?
Hmm.
Because, like, I don't know. I think you could argue both, where obviously, like, there's certain ideas that are like pervasive and like really get ingrained and have like incredibly negative consequences or positive. I mean, like, so the ideas are influential, but then like the Cumberbatch point there, um, that's like, yeah, but also then it's kind of at least, and I'm sure it's Hollywoodized, but in 13 Days, they portray the story again. We're just going to kind of go with the movie being accurate history, Three Dogs North esque.
It absolutely is.
We did
But
our
they
research.
Right.
They
But-
they did their research.
Yeah.
I
But it's
trust
kind of
that.
portrayed as like the whole Cuban Missile Crisis came down to like a last minute backdoor meeting between Bobby Kennedy, who was the attorney general, and like, I don't know if it was the Russian ambassador to the States or some type of like Russian political figure. And they floated like a deal that the US would agree to, but like couldn't make public because it would be too unpopular, to like remove some missiles from Turkey that were obsolete. But it would allow, who would that have been? Like Khrushchev in the Soviet Union. It would allow him to like appease his party enough to pull the missiles because no one wanted to go to war.
Right.
But it was, it is an interesting movie in that way. And even if that's not true, like stuff like that has happened to where like this meeting, like this one deal prevented war or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's my question. Ideas or people?
Yeah, and then the question is like, what do you mean by history? Because
What is
the best, yeah. Uh, well, I mean it like history has changed because of Christ, and the Bible has a certain view of what history is, and the moments that sort of mark it, the beginning of history. This is Corbone that I'm teaching to the seminarians. The fullness of time, that's the incarnation, and then the last times, which we live in now, until the consummation of time, which is the parousia. But there are these moments that kind of mark it, that are in history, that happen in history, but they're events that transcend it. So like the resurrection is still happening right now, just as the crucifixion, the suffering of Jesus is happening right now. Those are events that happen in time. If you were there at the time, you would have seen it. But they're events in the sense that they're not subject to dead time, that they just pass away and then that's it. And so in a certain sense, yeah, people who are baptized into those mysteries shape history. Like they are already living in the last times, and like whatever the powers of the world do, that stuff is like relatively like completely irrelevant. When we're all in the streets of gold praising God forever in heaven, you'll be like, what years were you in that history? And it's like, it's important in the measure that it sanctified you and you became a saint because of that offering that you were able to make, but not like what we think here on this side without the lens of faith is like, oh, the really important people are Herod and Pilate and Caesar, but they're actually not.
Yeah, dude, that's good. I'm also kind of got a jump start on Lent, but I'm reading Story of a Soul again. And it's just like, man, if there's more to say there, we can go to it. But like the little flower, I mean, she lives in that reality of like, and she doesn't move from it. And I don't think her parents did either. That's why her parents are saints. But that's why, I mean, this is certainly, to use kind of like I think I've heard Barron use this line about books before, but this is my third time reading Story of a Soul. And more than any other time, like this time it really sings from the page. Mm-hmm. But because it's like, she lives in that place. Like this is the last times, like Jesus is here in everything. But then how she frames it and everything she talks about is like radically in front of her. Like, there, I mean,
that doesn't tear her out of reality as it is in time and matter. No, it puts her more deeply in it.
But then internally, like the battles that she understands as like the fiercest are like, hey, how does she respond when the communal paintbrushes at Carmel are not put back correctly? And like, that's the battle for sanctity of like, yeah, I mean, not spending a day like fretting and worrying about like global crises that it won't do any good for us to like hash out. And I mean, I think it's okay to like process and talk about and everything, but like we're not going to solve. But internally, like in the fight for holiness, like how I respond to this like person's email who like needs something from me, like that's the battle that will make me a saint or not.
Whether or not I simply endure my fellow podcaster continuing to clear his throat into the microphone, or like tell him he should go get a glass of water.
I'm drinking coffee.
Shots fired. Shots fired. Just
shot fired.
Block it.
We were, did I tell you guys this? I was eating lunch with the students in the student center, like food court the other day, and they have this big, huge TV screen that just flashes like news clips or PSAs and stuff, and there was something about Russia and Biden and blah blah blah. And this girl just glances up at it and she goes, "Ugh, there's too much historic stuff happening. I don't want my life to be in the textbook." It's like, that's really funny.
I got a great meme from a friend a few days ago, and it was a picture from True Detective, and it was McConaughey smoking with like big eyes. It was the episode when he goes back into the gang, and the meme
Yeah.
was every millennial who's enduring the third once in a lifetime world event in 5 years. It's like, yes, that's it.
Smoking a cig, wide-eyed.
Unprecedented times.
Just stressed beyond belief.
Yeah.
Golly. No, I appreciate that insight, Connor. That's a totally different way to view history. And I got to tell you, man, like I have been thinking a lot about the Putin stuff, the Russia stuff.
Oh, especially, yeah.
Not from that perspective.
Mm.
But that's worldview shift.
Right.
Like, how do you understand history? How do you understand life? Like, what's the primary story that's being told here?
Well, and both the causes of the pain and suffering and the historical unrest, and also the answer to them are different. From the world's perspective, you asked, do people or ideas, and I assume also events, shape history? It could be like an earthquake. It could be a famine, that like ticks off certain things because of just the deterministic closed loop of the world. If all the world is this series of determinisms, actions, reactions, then yeah, like things are caused by discrete individuals or discrete events. There's not a communal like network. There's not a connection that we all have. And that's kind of what the Bible says is like war and crime and poverty and all bad things, finally even death, is caused by the thing that we all share, which is sin. So in a way, we've all sinned in Adam, and we all participate in the bad that happens. None of us is like, oh, that I'm outside of that event and I'm simply suffering it. I'm simply a victim of it. But in some ways, we've caused it. We've caused war. We've caused crime. We've caused poverty. But also, or we're responsible for it. But
Isn't
also the solution. Go ahead.
Isn't that a Merton insight?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't he at some point say like,
World War II.
How can I wonder at so much war in the world when there's so much war in my own heart?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Huh. Right.
And by the same token, redemption is the also in community, and it's by coming into that death, coming into that darkness, becoming sin who did not know sin, so that we could become the righteousness of God. The escape from history and its determinisms is not by like standing outside of it, but by willingly entering into it with Christ and finding him there, and standing in solidarity with sinners out of love, because that's where Jesus is. Yeah, to your Therese point about the paintbrush, it's like, yeah, it just I think changes the way you see everything. Doesn't make it less important, I don't think. And like, certainly we pray for peace, and we're not like indifferent to the suffering of many people or even our own fears and stuff like that. But I think that's how you stay plugged into communion, and not because these sort of things are so easily dismaying. They disturb our peace. They take us out of communion, and we fall back into the pre-Christ way of looking at things, where we're all just sort of like atomized individuals, and there's nothing that's finally drawing us together. But somehow mysteriously we believe through history, and it's easier when you look at it from 100 years of perspective than when you're actually in it. Like, right. Somehow through this suffering and this death, we are being drawn not only closer to God, but closer to each other, so that when we all look back on this, like as a family in heaven, we can say like, this is how he saved us,
Well, and that I think that's the glory of the saints. Rob, to your question, is it people or ideas? And I've heard this idea that people are essentially the mediators and the translators between like the ideas symbolized in heaven, like the Platonic kind of notion that the ideas are above, and then you have the earth that's matter and potential, and the human being is the person in between that embodies and translates the ideas into the material world. So they're like the conduit that brings those things into existence.
Mm.
And the ideas grip people, but then people actually act them out. And so it makes something that's just potential and kind of ethereal into, it has material reality that actually affects people's lives and touches people. And it's like, that's why the saints are so dang important, because you see how they live. At least this is for me. I see how they live and I'm like, oh, there's actually, there's another story that's going on here. And I need it to be translated in an embodied way so that I can actually see what it looks like. So like when I see parishioners whose peace is not disturbed, and they're actually like really trusting in Jesus Christ when they talk about Russia and all these different things that are going on, like, oh, look at that. There's something different happening there. And I need to see that idea embodied in a person so that I can actually live like the Christian narrative. It can't be just an idea there.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have those saints that actually like bring that stuff into reality, they mediate heaven and earth, like that's a powerful, powerful thing to see. And I think that's why we go back to Therese. It's like, show me what that really looks like. Like, help me understand this. Help me to live in this other world here and now. Because man, I keep getting caught up in this world, you know?
One thing, dang it. That was for you. That was for you, disc.
Dang it.
That's such I know that feeling exactly. You start talking, oh, crud.
There it is. I can feel it.
This is such a side note on all of that, but it's funny. I don't know if we've told the story on the podcast, but it's one of my favorites from our seminary years when you were talking about just like that the deterministic loop. But you remember that it was like a red book. I think Father Gus had us read in philosophy on free will and determinism.
All you needed to say was red book, and I knew.
I know it.
Yeah, and then Father Christian, he was like a first year pre-theology guy at dinner with the Chicago guys and Cardinal George, and just, oh my gosh, just walked right into it. And yes, Your Eminence, we're reading Free Will and Determination. It's like, what was Cardinal George's response? Like, what are you in kindergarten?
No, it's I think he said, oh, who wrote the book? He was like trying to, Cardinal George loved talking about stuff. He's like, so who was the author? And Christian just goes, I don't know. It's a red book.
It's a red book.
And he goes, what? Are you in preschool?
Preschool. Dude, burned.
Yeah, burned by Cardinal George, a living saint.
In pre-Thea 1. Like, welcome to seminary, child.
It's a red book.
Finger paints are over there.
I just love, like, are you in preschool?
From a mega mind.
Yeah,
right.
That's what he dropped. That's from the fold.
Right.
Yeah, man. Oh, gosh. Glorious.
Man. Yeah. What else to say about that?
Yeah.
I think friendship is one of the great antidotes to despair as well. You talk about the worldview, like seeing the world that way. I mean, it's kind of happening here where we're reminding each other of reality, but
right.
that discrete, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but the devil scatters. He wants us to think everything is discrete and separate and individual. Um, and what the Spirit is doing is drawing us together, and when we're in heaven, we will see. This is what I mean by like the family looking back. We will see how the truth of the matter is that we are an organism. We are the body of Christ. Like I am as related to you guys, especially as priests, but to every baptized Christian as related as the cells are in my body. That they don't make sense on their own. And for any of my cells to think like I'm not responsible for you eating that unhealthy food or whatever, like what unifies us all is the Holy Spirit, our baptism. And because we are in this last times tension, we can like think and act as if we are still subject to that alienation. And the truth of communion is right here in front of us all the time. And as friends, it's like this great gift that God gives us, I think like an outgrowth of the sacraments, but also leads us back into them. It's one of these fruits of spiritual communion is that we are drawn into spiritual communion with others and friends, and we enjoy each other, and we get a taste of the kingdom here and now, and that's why it's like not bad to enjoy life even when bad things are happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's necessary.
Totally.
That makes me think of makes me think of
former friends.
Well, yeah, I got a couple things bouncing around in my head, but JP2 before the start of World War II, like he would get together with his broskies and
brohammers,
his brochachos, brochamigos,
his broling rocks,
and like they had an underground little like artistic humanities society.
That's right.
That was intended to, in a non-stuck up way, like enjoy the finer things of life, even in the midst of like possible destruction. And on the brink of World War II, they actually went out of their way to live into friendship and to live into, specifically theater and, doing all these different things together. So it seems like I think that actually is necessary. It's not just a nice little cherry on top.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, actually, in order to get through things like that, you actually need friendship.
And I also think I would go even farther to say, or is it further, that it's not just like a means to an end. Like, as if, and what I'm thinking is, as you frame that, like the reality is this darkness and difficulty and death. And this thing is kind of like our little carry on through that. But really, like what he's doing with those friends is we're going to live in the real reality fearlessly, while the world around us is a world, and not to stand above it like oil and water, but like live in the midst of it, because that's where the kingdom is. And we wouldn't want to be outside of the world, because that's where Jesus has come to save us. But we are with him, in the storm, and we do not fear. And that's the thing about JP2 that really I long for, is that kind of courage that comes from being in communion. And I think it's from his devotion to the Eucharist and to Mary, that he can stand there with the Soviet Union, powers that be, when he visits Poland, and to be totally fearless. Like, they want that guy dead. He's basically like ending their grip on Eastern Europe.
Yeah, he did that, dude.
Non-violently.
He was salt and light.
Yeah.
Like he added actual flavor to life and light
and reminded
into the
people who
world.
they were and what life could be and is
Yeah.
in Jesus.
Yeah. Right. Because, dude, he's so epic.
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast the other day. Matt Fradd was on it. And I guess this is a little bit of a confession. I listened to another podcast. Um, the life is, the world's crazy.
Mm.
What am I supposed to do? You know? And it's called The Glory Restored, I think is what it is. It's Dr. Bob Schutz and another guy.
That Schutz is so hot right now. I hear his name a lot.
Oh, do you?
Mm-hmm.
That's Hansel. He's so hot right now.
What's that? Damn Hansel.
Oh no! Hold on to the idea.
Matt Fradd, Bob Schutz.
Matt Fradd, Bob Schutz.
I think you're about to trash the podcast.
And they were being so stupid, and it was not edifying at all. End of story.
Yeah, I agree.
Man, that's a great point.
Just go out of my way to just trash other podcasts. Like, okay, what were we talking about?
Apropos of nothing.
And Matt Fradd, he was right, because it's the cool thing about JP2 is he does that battle on an individual level with the fight between good and evil in his own heart. But because he does that so intensely, it also affects and impacts the bigger battle between good and evil, which is like clearly on display, which is an interesting thing. So one of the things that Matt Fradd talked about was he was like, try describing Lord of the Rings without talking about Sauron or Saruman, like the great evil battle that is taking place. That it's actually kind of like a really boring story if you don't actually talk about and describe like the epicness of the villain and the evil that they're facing. And like to see the large scale evils played out at the level of like powers and principalities, and like, yeah, there is this big battle that's taking place. In JP2, he in a sense like fought it at both levels. And I think because he had encountered that evil individually within his own heart, it allowed him to step onto the world stage,
Yeah,
with that courage and with that grace, and to be light and to be salt to the world, and to stand up to like national global evils, like these huge battles of darkness that will actually inflict great evil, like take people's lives, inflict a lot of suffering. And so in that way, like he is Jesus to the world.
Yeah.
There. He's so amazing, dude.
I think that's what I really admire and want to emulate, is not just the courage that comes from trust in Jesus, but trust in yourself as transformed by him and gripped by him, and he is alive in me. Because even that, like what you just said, you can get wrapped up in the internal battle and say like, oh Lord, I'm nothing, I'm a sinner, I'm bad, like all I need to do is get out of your way. But he chooses us. It's like praying with Mark, the call of the apostles. He summons those whom he wanted so that they might be with him and he might send them to preach. Like he doesn't need us, but he wants us, and he's chosen us, and he'll be with us. And like, that's been a big area of growth for me in the last 3-4 years, is just trusting my gut, trusting my instincts, and like believing that I'm making this choice today to be faithful, and I will be faithful because of that choice, and because of I can count on the grace to follow through, and I'm not always worried that I'm going to lose to the devil. And that's, I think, where we see it on display in a JP2, where he's just not afraid that he's going to fall. And Thomas More, same way. Like there's some line, Father Tim Gallagher mentioned this in a homily at IPF once, where he tells his son-in-law, I think, when he's getting on the boat to go to the king to basically die, and he says like, don't worry, the battle's already been fought and it's over. meaning in his soul. Like he's already decided there's nothing that will stop me from. I'll do whatever to cling to the truth here. Well, dudes, we'll see in like a few weeks when we post this whether this is still relevant.
Yeah, hopefully it's not.
Yeah,
That would
Like,
be
hopefully-
great. That would
that would
also
be
be
so
on
good.
brand as well. Like, just doesn't make sense. And,
It's like, what are these guys talking about? Because I know we got to get going here in a bit, but I'm going to see Peterson live tonight.
Oh, sweet.
cool.
Yeah, very excited for that.
All right, tell him that we have a podcast and that it's really important.
Yeah. And if he wants to be a silent guest, we could have him on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want him saying anything though.
So the only shout out you're going to get is we're going to go out of our way to trash your podcast.
Dude,
I'm
he's
super
so lucky
excited.
to get to meet you tonight.
Big time. Big time. I'm actually going to bring my family Christmas card. We paid extra to do these VIP tickets, and apparently you get like 10 minutes one-on-one with them. And I'm like really excited for it. So I've been like thinking about what I'm going to say. I thought about writing it out. So I'm like so pumped.
I wonder how many people would get that 10-minute.
Dr. Peterson. Thank you. My name is
so
Mike.
much sweat.
It's Mike. My name is Mike.
Here we go.
It's great to be with you tonight.
I'm just going to bring this is the family Christmas card. And it's got like, it's front and back. It's just all the kids and all the siblings. And I just want to tell him about my dad and about my mom. And I think he's going to be pumped about that. And so I'm going to bring him that. And then I got a rosary that
his wife prays the rosary now, doesn't she?
His wife prays the rosary like every day religiously. And I have one of the rosaries that I brought out to Kansas when I went out for the Capon thing to touch to his altar, to his burial place. So I'm gonna give that to him and say, hey, this is for your wife, and I hope she's doing okay, and she can pray this, and kind of tell him about Capon as well. So I'm pumped.
It's awesome, dude. I have to get going.
Yep.
Peace, guys.
Later, my dudes.